Of this tragedy begins to sink in. We are learning more about how ruthlessly this plan was carried out.
3:26 p.m., a massive car bomb shatters downtown Oslo. The target, the Prime Minister's office. The streets turn into makeshift triage areas. But this horror is only beginning. 45 minutes later, and 23 miles west of the city, the shooter arrives at the ferry dock for Utoya Island. This yellow tent right back here, that's where the ferry comes in. That's also where the shooter boarded the ferry to take him to the island. One witness we spoke to says he was so convincing as a cop that officials from the island even came over to the ferry here, checked his credentials, and let him on.
Did he act alone? That's the big question tonight, after the man accused of mass murder in Norway told a court there were others involved. Anders Breivik told the judge he acted to save the country being overrun by Muslim immigrants. He said he had 2 other right-wing cells working with him and links to extremist groups elsewhere in Europe.
As he was driven away from the court, it emerged the police now have a new line of inquiry. Breivik told the court there were 2 other cells in his network that they'd met in London back in 2002.
Set the scene, the prosecution quotes from Breivik's Manifesto. I did not fully comprehend at the time how privileged I was to be in the company of some of the most brilliant political and military tacticians in Europe. Breivik looks increasingly uncomfortable. What is the purpose? Why ask these questions? You are trying to cast doubt on the existence of this network. Isn't that right? I know you will try to delegitimize me over the next 2 hours. You have chosen a line. You defend that line. You have a mandate. I understand that mandate.
Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. I have quite an interesting video for you guys today that has been a long time in the making. Just warning you up front, this is going to be a long video. I may end up even breaking this up into 2 parts. We'll see how it goes, but I'm working with like a 25-page script and I have tried to cut down as much information as possible, but I think everything that's in here is important. So get yourself a tea or coffee and settle in, because we are going to be talking about Anders Behring Breivik and the Gladio, PTK, and ZioMasonic connections. Quote, "So let us fight together with Israel, with our Zionist brothers, against all anti-Zionists, against all cultural Marxist and multiculturalist," unquote. That is an excerpt from Breivik's Manifesto. This and a number of other interesting passages were not really talked about in the mainstream media and how they characterized this incident. And if you're not familiar with Breivik and what he did, this was a DT attack in Norway. This was the biggest, basically, mass casualty event since World War II. It was a very big deal in the country. It traumatized the nation. On July 22nd, 2011, Norwegian Anders Behring Breivik unalived 77 people, many of them children, in 2 separate events. So 8 people died in a car bombing in downtown Oslo, and then another 69 people were unalived in a mass shooting at a Workers' Youth League summer camp on the island of Utoya. Breivik was, of course, described in news reporting as a neo-NDT who was motivated by extreme anti-Islamic views. What remained absent from nearly all mainstream reporting was his fervent pro-Zionist beliefs. The fact that Breivik's attack took place exactly 65 years to the day of the bombing of the King David Hotel by the air gun, killing 91 people and injuring 46 more, also went unmentioned in mainstream reporting. Understanding the truth behind the Norwegian mass attack is incredibly important today in light of the current situation playing out geopolitically in the Middle East. We will explore connections to Gladio, PTK, ZioMasonry, rogue intelligence agencies, the hardline Likud Party, and a shadowy network of arms for drugs operatives and potential MKULTRA-style programs still in place today. But before we get into that, I think it's important that we do at least a little bit of a background on Breivik and what he was like growing up. Most of this comes from the book One of Us by Asni Searstad, which is a very good book if you want to learn more about Breivik, what his childhood was like, how people described him. She's got interviews with his sister, with his mother before she passed away. But the only issue I have with it is that it does not question the official narrative of the actual event on July 22nd and doesn't look into the deeper, more bizarre and strange parts of it. But it's still very good information. So we'll do some background on Anders. Anders Behring Breivik was born on February 13th, 1979 in Oslo, Norway, to parents Wenche Behring and Jens David Breivik. He was an extreme narcissist, seemingly from a very young age. Unsurprisingly, right? We have another one with special boy syndrome. His mother was undoubtedly the most significant influence in his life. After she left home, she married Jens Breivik and gave birth to Anders. Wenche noticed that Jens didn't seem to like children in general, and he wasn't really interested in his own son. He wasn't particularly good with his son, and he'd pretty much like checked out of the family. Wenche had problems with Anders from a very young age. He was a very difficult child, a baby. You know, as a toddler, he was very clingy, he was moody, he was occasionally violent, and he was very whiny. His mother soon filed for divorce from his father, Jens, and she started acting out. His mother, I think, is a big reason why he kind of became the way that he became, and they had a very bizarre relationship, as you'll see, but she obviously had similar mental health issues. So soon after divorcing his father, she filed for something called respite care, which is a program, a social program Norway does that I think is actually like a good idea. What it is it's a service offered to overwhelmed caregivers to give them a break, right? So you have maybe like a single mom or a single dad, they're working full time, maybe they need to work even 2 jobs to support their family because they don't have, you know, the second person they're providing. And so the respite care is kind of like a foster family from a stable family, like a married family with children. And basically they will take the kid and, you know, the child can spend some time with them, and it gives the parents like a bit of a break to maybe have some alone time to relax a little bit or to get some things done they wouldn't normally do. It's basically for single parents who need a support network, who maybe don't have an extended family to help out, to babysit, and things like that. Anders was assigned to visit a more stable family 2 times a month. Wenche started acting weird and making concerning requests to this respite care family that was helping her with Anders. She claimed that her baby, Anders, scared her. She became strangely obsessed with the young Anders' sexuality and insisted, I kid you not, insisted that Anders be allowed to touch the pee-pee of his respite care dad regularly. And the reasoning for this was like, she was like, well, somebody has to teach him what it means to be a man. But that's like not the way you do that. That's really weird. It's really creepy. And her obsession with a toddler's sexuality is itself bizarre. I think it suggests that something weird is going on here between them. That should have been the first indication that Breivik was most likely SA'd as a child by his mother. I believe that that's probably what happened, that he is a victim of childhood SA. The family did not report her for these strange requests because they were embarrassed. I mean, could you imagine going and telling like the social services people, yeah, so the mom of the child that we occasionally look after is making some strange requests. She wants the child to be able to play with my pee-pee. Like that would be weird, that conversation. The respite care family described Anders as a sweet boy, and apparently he was the total opposite towards his mother and sister, whom he would hit. He would smirk when he was punished, but he behaved very differently when he was not around his mother. I think that's another red flag as far as she goes. He would crawl into his mother's bed at night and press his body against her. And this bizarre relationship between the two of them would continue throughout his life. I mean, he's like 4 or 5 years old at this point. This is not normal behavior for anybody, let alone a child that age. But it is what you might expect from a child who is being abused. It should also be noted his father, Jens, who the mom divorced, was a diplomat at the Norwegian embassy in London. Around this time, his mother was said to be experiencing mental health issues, acting weird. She'd have these like manic episodes, and she would constantly speak inappropriately about sex. She and Anders were eventually referred to the Center for Child and Adolescent Psychiatry for evaluation when he was just 4 years old. And that doesn't happen for like no reason. If you're being sent there to a Center for Child Psychiatry, something very wrong is going on in that home, okay? They said he seemed to be a boy who took no joy in life. Again, more signs of potential abuse. He wasn't good at expressing emotions or empathizing with others. His mother was eventually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which makes her hypersexual behavior make a little bit more sense. And because of this, the center recommended Anders be placed in foster care. While his absent father, was never really around, he didn't really care about his son or wasn't really interested in being part of his life. When he heard that his son might go into foster care, he demanded emergency custody. But a court concluded that since he wasn't in immediate physical danger, the request was denied. And that's, how it goes in kind of like the Western family law system. Mothers pretty much get deferential treatment. If there isn't a reason to like take a child from their mother, they typically don't. It seems that at this point, both Wenche and Anders began to put on an act for social workers, and the case was dropped. So obviously there was a conversation like, hey, unless you want to get put into some other family, you better pretend like everything's okay. When he was young, a Chilean family moved into the neighborhood, and Anders ended up befriending the daughter. They would play together. They would listen to like American music together. There are stories about him doing like messed up things as a kid. There's stories saying that he would drown bumblebees or that he would poke rats with pins, but I'm not sure if that's true or if it's just gossip from people made up after the fact. Sometimes, when somebody knew somebody as a child and that person ends up getting arrested for a very high profile case and the media is interviewing people, sometimes they embellish stories, sometimes they make things up because they get attention. So I take that stuff with a grain of salt. He had behavioral problems though, indeed, and there are reports that he would do things like urinate on mailboxes, like he was engaging in attention-seeking behavior. He ended up adopting the nickname Morg, and he hung out with pretty much immigrant kids. Like, he didn't really fit in with the Norwegian peers that he had. He was hanging out with, like, the, you know, the nerds, essentially, the immigrants. That was his friend group. He did go to an elite high school, and in high school, he was super into rap music and hip hop. He tried to rap himself, and he would break dance with his group of friends, the immigrants. They would rap and break dance like they were total dorks. He then formed a tagging graffiti gang with his friends, and they would go out at night and spray paint their tags. He eventually got arrested for this because he wasn't very good at it. Basically, there were other groups of graffiti gangs out there that had been doing it a longer time. They kind of knew how to evade law enforcement and what have you, and he basically jumped right into the scene and thought that he knew everything, which is something he does repeatedly. It's his narcissistic special boy syndrome. He immediately thinks that he's smarter than everybody else. So he ends up getting arrested, and his father Jens cuts off contact with him. And he didn't totally drop out of his life, but he just stopped talking to him. Due to the fallout of his second arrest for graffiti, he ended up snitching on his friends, the group of immigrants, so you can imagine that didn't go over well with them. And after his third arrest, his father disowned him and never saw him again. I feel like his dad really failed him. I think that a lot of, the social system when he was a kid failed him. They failed to recognize that something was really wrong in his household going on with his mother. It's sad. Around age 18, Breivik joined the youth group associated with the Norwegian Progress Party, and I know it's called Progress Party, which can be confusing, but this is a Norwegian conservative political party. They just call it Progress Party. Around this time, he fancied himself a metrosexual, and he occasionally wore makeup and had a more flamboyant dress. And he also ends up getting a nose job and some other cosmetic surgeries. There's some questionable things going on here. He ended up becoming a mildly successful telemarketer, but he then left that job to join new businesses, and this never ended well. His main goal was, at that time, to become a millionaire. Online, he complained about Norwegian women, how they wouldn't make good wives because, it's so feminist and it's too liberal. He decided to get instead a Ukrainian mail order bride, and so he communicated with this woman online mostly, and she came to visit him and spend time with him. And of course, after spending time with him in person and actually getting to know him, she didn't like him, and he didn't like her either. He ended up buying her a plane ticket and sending her home. At this point, he ends up falling in love with a conservative woman from the conservative political party he joined, the Progress Party. He meets her, he falls in love with her, and she was a dark-skinned woman. And also around this time, he developed an extreme hatred for Muslims. This seems to have, I think, come from Lena, the girlfriend who he fell in love with, because she was very anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant. Together, the two of them would talk about Ayn Rand and their dislike of the immigration policies. They joined the Oslo Pistol Club, but shortly after that, their relationship fell apart. So they were in this, he meets her in the Progress Party, and she becomes like quite the star in politics. Like she starts gaining traction and she's very popular there. Meanwhile, he was writing things and he was trying to get people interested in his politics, and he wanted to advance, but he was basically ignored. So he further descended into the internet and message boards. He felt that people only got ahead in politics if they were good at networking, whereas the actually competent and talented people were overlooked. And while there's some truth in that, this is more like him venting about the narcissistic injury that his girlfriend was better suited for politics and excelled at that, and he did not. So of course he characterizes himself, he would include himself in the actually competent and talented person that is overlooked. He's, he feels like he's constantly being rejected. In 2003, he wrote on the Progress Party message board that a civil war against Muslims was coming, and that would be the last time that he would post on that particular message board. In the fall, he created an online diploma services company to produce high-quality fake, what they call decorative diplomas. They're not, real diplomas, of course. And he actually made a little bit of money doing this. These diploma mills were a big thing at the time before they ended up getting shut down. Around 2005, he decided that he wanted to join the Freemasons. His mother had a second cousin who was a member of the Freemasons, so he hadn't met the guy prior to wanting to be a Freemason, so he meets him and convinces him to help him join the organization. And so he does end up sponsoring Anders to become a Freemason, but he doesn't get immediately accepted, which upset him and pushed him further into the internet. I mean, he wasn't like rejected, but it was a long process. It would take him, I think, like a year to become a full-fledged member. So in the meantime, when that didn't happen immediately, like, he was seething as usual. In 2006, he got totally wrapped up in playing World of Warcraft. He played as a mage under the handle Anders Nordic. Very original username here, guys. He joined a guild and became known as cheerful and affable, which is, kind of the opposite of how most people who knew him in the real world would describe him. In his real life, he was living with his mother, spending 16 hours a day in his gaming room. At this point, like, he is in his late 20s. He's got no family, no real life of his own. He doesn't really have anything going for him. All he has is his internet world. He went on to become the leader of his own guild in WoW. In 2007, after devoting an entire year to playing video games, he was finally fully accepted into the St. John's Freemasonic Lodge. And immediately upon being initiated and made a full-fledged member of the lodge, he starts hounding people about how to acquire wealth and power. And nobody was like interested in entertaining his nonsense because he is a novice. He's a new initiate. And the way that their system is set up is it is predicated on a hierarchical structure where you kind of rise through the ranks slowly. And there's always the dangled carrot of, oh, you're going to get this secret information. We're going to let you in on the secret of the mysteries. And this is all nonsense. It is just designed to keep people interested in progressing and to give you just enough that you feel like you're getting something really valuable from it. But it's, it's nonsense. He's like asking them how to be a good knight, seemingly not understanding the levels of his own autism. To assume that Freemasons are knights is ridiculous. He was bored by the formal ceremony of the Freemasons, their initiatory ceremony, and he was frustrated by how long it was taking him to advance in the ranks. And of course, that wasn't anything personal to him. That's just how it works. Everybody has to go through the same process, and it usually takes the same amount of time to progress in the ranks. But of course, he took this as a personal injury, narcissistic injury, so he starts blowing off the Freemason meetings and eventually stopped getting invited to their events. Or at least that's the official story regarding like his level of involvement with the Masons. He left his own guild to join another one, and he was promptly made fun of, as usually happened. He was not a very well-liked guy. He was basically always running people off because of his narcissistic personality that he was seemingly never aware of. Like, he never had the self-awareness to realize that he was a difficult person or he was rubbing people the wrong way, and then he feels like deeply injured and aggrieved when people end up rejecting and abandoning him. But again, he doesn't self-reflect. He's always the victim. He spent 5 years from 2006 to 2011 engrossed in World of Warcraft. But as he struggled with friends in WoW, he began to spend more time on right-wing internet forums, especially ones dedicated to talking about the Islamification of Europe. These forums would often invoke like the Crusades, trying to connect the modern problem of mass migration to these past holy wars. Breivik thought that within a generation, they would be forced to live under Sharia law. The people he was talking to on these forums accepted him because he was parroting their same beliefs back to him, unlike everyone else that he basically runs out of his life. Like, these people on these internet forums, they're basically echo chambers where they reinforce each other's ideas. And so he felt like, oh yeah, I'm not being rejected. He decided to dedicate himself to writing his own book. He became obsessed with the Knights Templar. When his friends took him out for his 30th birthday, all this guy wants to talk about is the book he's writing. Oh, buy my book. He claimed his book was about the Crusades and the Battle of Vienna. Now, think about this. These are 30-year-old grown men. Most men that are in their 30s, are like married, they have kids, they're working professional jobs, but Anders is living with his mom. He is playing video games all the time and like talking about the Knights Templar and the Crusades. It's like weird, and he didn't seem to have the self-awareness to know that that's weird for somebody his age. Just imagine 30 years old and you're spurging about the Knights Templar in the Crusades. Like, you have to be a very tedious nerd for that to be a thing at that age. Like, this dude was a dork. Around 2009, he spent less time playing WoW and was spending more time on these right-wing forums, reading blog posts and books written under pseudonyms. One of the individuals he liked was somebody who went by the name Fjordman that would post on a forum called Gates of Vienna. On a forum called document.no, Breivik would post there, and he kind of became popular on that forum. He was talking about the Eurabia theory. This was the idea that Muslims were turning European nations into Muslim caliphates, and that the European elites were in on this process, and that is the Eurabia theory. He used the comment section on the website to post an open letter to Fjordman, one of the writers that he liked. He requested that he email him, and 2 days later, in fact, he did. Fjordman reached out and said, I heard you were wanting to get a hold of me. And of course, you know, getting a response from Fjordman, Breivik is like spurging out. He's ecstatic. He starts talking about the book he's writing. He's saying, oh, it's almost completed. He would be publishing it for free. And of course, you know, Fjordman isn't really interested in this. Breivik had amassed a pretty substantial number of followers on Facebook. He didn't want to be friends with neo-Ns, and he didn't like people who were openly racist on the internet. Even in his manifesto, he's like, I'm not a racist. I'm just against immigration. Breivik cared more about sort of like the aesthetics and the idea of the Templars than he really did about the actual history and truth of that organization. The book he wrote, his manifesto, is mostly stolen work from other people, including stuff written by Fjordman that is basically copied and pasted. He ripped some things verbatim from Ted Kaczynski, and he kind of put it's like a compendium of like random people's writings, and then he has his own part at the end. And again, 1,500 pages. He published the book under the pseudonym Andrew Berwick, so he's like Americanizing his name, you know. He writes about cultural Marxism and how the left was causing all of the problems. He interviews himself in the book. It's so narcissistic. He's interviewing himself and referring to himself as a leader of the Knights Templar, calling himself a commander. Imagine, 30 years old. I am a commander of the Knights Templar. The final part of his book, the Manifesto, is where he described exactly what he was going to do and how he was going to do it. He outlined his plan to do the bombing and then the mass shooting, with the targets being Norwegian journalists and cultural Marxists. These were white people that he deemed to be traitors. He even created like a ranking system for his enemies. This is how tedious, how neurotic and narcissistic he was, that he creates this ranking system. Class A traitors were leaders of political parties, cultural institutions, and media. He pronounced that they should be given the death sentence. Class B traitors were less important cultural Marxists that should also get the same sentence. These were basically the teenagers that he ruthlessly slaughtered. Class C consisted of those who aided and abetted the others. And for those people, he wanted to imprison them and fine them until they capitulated to him and the Knights Templar. He believed narcissistically that his attack would kick off this like big civil war, and that there would be autonomously functioning secret cells that would do shock attacks. And of course, the secret cells would be comprised of the Knights Templar. He said that this civil war would rage for years until the second phase, where the Knights Templar would prepare for a final coup of all of the governments of Europe. And then phase 3 would feature public executions of Class A and B traitors. It's literally psychotic. He wanted there to be factories of surrogate mothers. Factories. And he wanted unsuitable parents, people he deemed unsuitable, to lose their children, who would then be given to patriots who would raise them instead. And of course, the patriots would be people that bought into his Knights Templar nonsense. He wanted there to be a society that was very modest, chaste. Divorce would be penalized. Fathers would automatically get custody of their children in the event of a divorce. And I think that this is actually sad, because it's obvious that that stems from what he experienced as a child, his problems with his mother, the weird relationship there, his constant longing for his father who wanted nothing to do with him. You know, it is sad. Anders assigned himself the title of Justitius Knight Commander, meaning he'd be the judge and leader of this new society. And again, you're 30 years old, dude, and you're running around in your cosplay outfits, calling yourself Justitius Knight Commander, and, you know, writing your ridiculous book. I mean, it is pathetic behavior for a grown man. He created enrollment rituals for new initiates to his Knights Templar that he basically just ripped off of the Freemasons. You know, they would do like a Freemasonic ritual and would recite parts of his Manifesto. Again, narcissist. It is honestly one of the most absurd and ridiculous things I have ever heard. He gives instructions to prospective knights in his manifesto and outlines the exact plan that they should use, which was what he did. He spent a lot of time also writing about like fashion and aesthetics and basically cosplaying and LARPing. Like, he's telling them, if you want to be a knight, you know, you need to have like keep pictures of yourself looking cool that you keep on your person. So in case something happens, the media won't run with ones that make you look bad, but they'll use the cool ones. So have that stuff ready to go. He told people to write manifestos also. And, you know, there's pictures of him that he put in his own manifesto where he's like, he's in a wetsuit, posing with a firearm. He has one where he's wearing a literal fake military Knights Templar commander outfit. He would wear his little Freemason outfit. He has pictures of him in sort of like a gas mask and a weird suit, a full body suit. These were things that he thought were cool, I guess. But it's like, you're a grown dude and you're basically wearing costumes and taking pictures of yourself. You know what I mean? He also made sure to reiterate numerous times in his manifesto that he wasn't gay. You know, if you have to say that over and over again, I don't know. I think that's a little sus. In the interview he did with himself in the manifesto, he bizarrely spends a lot of time detailing the sex lives of his family members, including his sister, his stepfather, and his mother. He also rewrites basically his life story, and he delusionally claims that his mother just wouldn't let his father see him. And that's not the truth. You know, in reality, his dad was never interested in him and never really wanted to be part of his life. But in his mind, it was his mom just not letting them have a relationship. He also, in the book, brags about his hip-hop connections. It's honestly pathetic. He calls himself one of the most notable hip-hoppers from Oslo's west side. Yeah, the Oslo and their hip-hop community, sure thing. He bragged about what an amazing graffiti artist he was, and how, you know, if you're into the hip-hop scene and the graffiti scene, that's how you got girls and respect. But that didn't happen for him. He didn't get girls and he didn't get respect. He had snitched on people and ended up alienating like his friends. While he was writing the book, he was living with his mother, who was pretty much the only person that he talked to in real life, like in person. He was talking to a lot of people online, but that was the only person who he really would see in his day-to-day life. He talks about the Knights Templar, and he does claim in his manifesto that he attended secret meetings when he was younger, where he was recruited, and he talks about how like they ran background checks on him, and that this was like when he was 15 years old. And because of his other embellishments and lies in his manifesto about his family, and you question what he says, you take it with a grain of salt, but it is interesting that that actually could be a possibility. So keep that in mind as we go on. He also started taking steroids during this time, and he would demand that his mother bring his food up to him in his fart room. That's what he called his gaming room, the fart room. And he'd open the door, he'd eat the food, and then he would just take his dirty plates and just leave them outside the door for his mom to come and clean up. Like, you are a grown man, 30 years old, you can't even put your plate in the dishwasher. You have to have mommy come and pick your stuff up because you're in there gaming all day in the fart room. Like, guys, come on. At times, he would follow his mother around their apartment, and when she would sit down on the couch, instead of sitting next to her on the couch, he would get like right up to her, almost touching her, like uncomfortably close. There was something very disturbing about their relationship, obviously. When she broke up with her boyfriend, Anders got her a toy and then inquired about whether she enjoyed it. Again, totally normal behavior between a mother and a son. My goodness. He finally decided it was time to prepare for his attack. In 2009, he ended up creating a company called Breivik Geofarm. So he knew that he wanted to build like a massive bomb similar to McVeigh's. And so this was part of his plan. He got a secluded area of farmland, and he would use that farm as cover to order the supplies he would need. You have to make large purchases of fertilizer, so having a farm could give you a plausible reason for doing that. And that's where he would start working on testing the bomb. I think we've covered enough of his background. Now we're going to cover his links to other countries, to Gladio, to the Care Bears, the Freemasons, possible PTK stuff. 90 minutes before Breivik was reported to have detonated a massive fertilizer fuel bomb, a reminiscent of OKC, in the government district of downtown Oslo, and then proceeded to Utoya Island dressed as a uniformed police officer to massacre scores of youth attending the Norwegian Labour Party summer camp. Breivik sent out an email to several thousand people with his 1,500-page schizo manifesto. Among the recipients of the manifesto was a gentleman named Isaac Nygren. Nygren was a member of the right-wing, anti-Islamic, anti-Roma, pro-Care Bear Swedish Democrats, a political party Breivik was also affiliated with. Nygren is a pro-Care Bear Swedish Democrat activist who was only 21 years old at the time, but he had already run for municipal-level political office in his native province of Sondermanland in the municipality of Katrineholm, Sweden. It is noteworthy that Nygren was not in Sweden when he received Breivik's email, but according to the July 24 edition of Sweden's Nyheter newspaper, he was in the Care Bear Nation living on a kibbutz. The location of this kibbutz was not reported. Nygren has stated that he is pro-Care Bear. However, he is also a member of the Neo and Nordic Alliance, which has branches in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. There are now reports that last year Breivik attended a rally of the English Defence League, the EDL, in London to hear Dutch Freedom Party leader Geert Wilders, an ardent Muslim and supporter of the Care Bear Nation, address the gathering. There are other reports that Breivik actually met with the leadership of the EDL and with Wilders himself. The EDL's Swedish offshoot is the Swedish Defence League, which counts Nygren as one of its activists. In September of 2010, the Danish leftist newspaper Arbiter pointed to possible links between Nygren and the Danish People's Party of Pia Kærsgaard, which provides parliamentary support to the center-right Danish government. Breivik claimed his reasoning for carrying out the attack was he believed he was fighting back against the tide of Muslim immigration by going after those he deemed responsible, the cultural Marxist, instead of targeting the actual Muslims that he apparently didn't like. He went after a bunch of unarmed white kids. Make it make sense. Norwegian authorities seem to be allowing the attack to occur. Breivik had already been placed on a watch list due to his large purchase of fertilizer. He was able to slaughter children on the island for over an hour before police finally made it out there to stop him. Breivik had even tried calling the authorities multiple times to give himself up during the attack. He literally called the police and told them he's done, come get me, but they didn't show up. And so when they didn't show up, he just went on to unalive more kids, shooting them twice in the head to make sure that they were dead. And it's weird because there was a helicopter flying overhead that was filming the island and filming him on the island. It's grainy footage, but really the police couldn't get there for an hour and a half. That's a bit odd. In July 2011, it was reported that Jonas Gahr Store, Norway's Minister of Foreign Affairs, publicly stated Norway would be a leading country in recognizing the Palestinian state once Palestinian institutions are set up. In March of 2011, it was reported that the junior partner in the Norwegian government, the Socialist Left Party of Kristin Halvorsen, planned to vote on a measure calling for military action against the Care Bear Nation if it decided to act against Hamas in Gaza. So that's that was March of 2011, a few months before this event. I would say that would be something that would provoke the Care Bear Nation. Certainly they wouldn't have liked it. As we've seen with 9/11 and other deep events, it was reported that the Oslo police conducted a bombing exercise days before Breivik's bombing in Oslo. On the evening of July 21st, 2011, TV2 in Norway had a segment reporting on uniformed men in black with automatic weapons sweeping the exact surroundings of the building that would be hit in the bombing. You can't make that stuff up. The official story, though, is that Breivik acted alone. Yet an eyewitness, Emily Barsas, who was on Utoya Island, 19 years old, said that the shooting came from all different directions. There are other reports of more than one shooter from other witnesses. Alexander Stavdal said, "I believe that there were two people doing the shooting." In May of 2005, activist Post wrote the following: Norwegian police have today stated that anti-Islam terrorist Anders Behring Breivik acted entirely alone, without any physical or psychological accomplices. What an interesting thing to add. Psychological accomplices. Speaking at Breivik's trial in Oslo, police officers testified they'd found no evidence of a wider network, and that they didn't expect to find any in the future. Despite Breivik's insistence that he was in contact with at least 6 other radicals, including 2 one-man cells in Norway, Oslo Police Chief Kenneth Wilberg stated that he felt sure there were no such contacts, and Alf Nielsen of the Norwegian Criminal Police confirmed no such accomplices had been identified. Such apparently reassuring assertions were undermined, however, by other statements made by the men. Wilberg confirmed police have only been able to identify a small percentage of the intended recipients of Breivik's emailed manifesto. Due to a network provider spam filter, only about 1,000 of the 8,000 emails that were sent out were successfully delivered when Breivik sent them. Breivik has said that another member of the Knights Templar network was on this email list. Wilberg admitted that finding them would be like searching for a needle among 8,000 other needles. Alf Neeson similarly undermined his confident earlier assertions when he said that, in theory, it's possible to prove that something does not exist. All we can do is look, and at some point we have to conclude that this doesn't exist. Neeson's comments echo ones made by Breivik earlier in the trial, when he said that just because police hadn't found such a network doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Breivik also pointed out that using such flawed logics means that he didn't exist prior to July 22nd either, before warning that he wouldn't want to be the police spokesman when the next attack happens in Norway, because it will happen. Today's testimonies are puzzling and troubling. In addition to the many thousands of untraceable contacts, evidence proves that Breivik was indeed at the places he said he was at the times when he claims to have met other extremists. Breivik has consistently referred to a founding meeting of the Knights Templar in London in 2002, attended by other militants, including a man he described as his mentor, who he calls Richard the Lionhearted. A cafe credit card receipt proves he was indeed in London at the time. Stamps in his passport prove that he was in Liberia in spring of 2002, where he claims he met a Serbian nationalist. The Serb, wanted for war crimes, is another contact who police have dismissed as non-existent. In August of 2011, famed 9/11 researcher Christopher Berlin wrote, "I have spent much of the past week reading and thinking about the atrocities and the young man from Oslo who carried out these heinous crimes. The best analysis I've read thus far is Dr. K.R. Bolton's scholarly article entitled Anders Breivik Neocon, published online in Foreign Policy Journal. The fact that Breivik's twisted worldview is in complete agreement with the extremist Zionism of the Likud Party is ignored by mainstream media reports. The Norwegian and Swedish papers have reported that the focus of the investigation had been to determine if other people were involved in the shooting of young people on the island near Oslo. Indeed, there were several eyewitness reports of a second shooter, a man with dark hair, who was taller in height. The way that victims at the edge of the water appear to have fallen back away from the water seems to indicate that perhaps they were shot from the water. One survivor from the island has reported the shooter used a boat during the spree. He claimed that he would go around the island in the boat shooting at people. There are clearly many unanswered questions about how this event was carried out, and exactly who all was involved with Breivik in the planning and execution of the atrocities in Norway. Channel 2 reported Anders Behring Breivik, who committed the massacre in Norway on Friday, in which over 76 people were unalived, spoke out in the past against Islam and said he is a strong supporter of the Care Bear Nation. According to the report, in an English document published on the internet before the event, Breivik called himself a strong supporter of Care Bearism. He praised Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism, and attacked the European political establishment because he saw it as being anti-Care Bear. Breivik commended the Care Bear Nation for not giving most of the Muslims who live under its control civil rights, as opposed to various European countries. He also praised Benjamin Netanyahu for including the Yisrael Benetu and Shah's parties in his coalition. He writes, It's time to end the stupid support for the Palestinians and begin to support our cultural cousins, the Care Bear Nation. As reported by Max Blumenthal, in November 2010, the Care Bear government accused the Norwegian government of an anti-Care Bear incident for funding a trip for students to New York to see the Gaza monologues play. Then, the day before Breivik's attack, which he planned long in advance, Norway's foreign minister Jonas Gahr Store visited the labor youth camp at Utoya. There he was met with demands to support the Palestinian Authority's unilateral statehood bid. Quote, "The Palestinians must have their own state, the occupation must end, the wall must be demolished, and it must happen now," the foreign minister declared, earning cheers from the audience of the young kids at the camp. Faith and Heritage reports that one of the right-wing forums Anders would post on, where he gained some popularity, the website we talked about earlier, document.no, was run by a man who was a Billy Crystal-style neocon named Hans Rustad, and that he is in fact a Care Bear. Rustad is a former left-wing journalist turned neocon. The website claims that only Muslim immigration should be restricted and that Asians and non-Muslim Africans are making a positive contribution to Norway. The website fanatically supports the Care Bear Nation and opposes Norwegian recognition of Palestinian statehood. Dr. Carrie Bolton writes, "The only right that Breivik can said to be identified with is the Care Bear extreme right. This calls to mind the likes of the Care Bear Defense League, the Likud Party, the Settler Movement, etc. Breivik's support for the expansion of the Care Bear Nation's borders north and south also reminds one of the greater Care Bear empire that has always been the basis of the Care Bear extreme right. He sees the Care Bear Nation as the vanguard in the fight against Islam, writing in his manifesto, quote, "While most people refer to the Care Bear security fence as a wall, the fact remains that less than 5% of the barrier is actually concrete slab. The rest is a network of fence with sensors. The fence has cut T incidents by more than 90% since its completion. What was the reason for establishing the security fence area? The security fence is being built with the sole purpose of saving the lives of the Care Bear citizens who continue to be targeted by the T campaign that began in 2000. So let's talk about PTK theory of Dave McGowan. Is it possible that Breivik was PTK'd, programmed to yeet? Breivik claimed that he conspired with business and political leaders in London years before he set his plan into motion. And indeed, his manifesto is datelined London 2011. In his manifesto, Anders made reference to his mentor, an Englishman who he called Richard. He claims that a small meeting in London in 2002 put him down the path towards his attack. The meeting was a group of like-minded extremists who were meeting to resurrect the Knights Templar Europe, a military group whose purpose was to seize political and military control of Western European countries and implement a cultural conservative agenda. Anders said that the participants of this meeting hailed from all over Europe and that he was first put into contact with them by a Serbian Crusader commander. During his Channel 4 report, Jon Snow asked how it was possible that police knew the name of the killer by the time they arrived on Utoya Island. Large parts of course, the manifesto were written by other people. So that's another sign of PTK. He didn't even write this, or maybe he only wrote parts of it and it was compiled with other people. The farm that we talked about that he rented when he created the Geo Farm company, The place where he would perfect his bomb-making skills was linked to drugs and gangsters. 2 years prior to his renting it, the farm was actually being used by criminal gangs as one of Norway's biggest marijuana farms, and this was before, like, medical marijuana and things like that. The farm also happens to be very close to Norway's biggest military base and the place where Norway's special forces are trained. Oh, just another coincidence. A guy who knew Breivik was interviewed for RT. When asked why he would carry out the attack, he responded, quote, "I cannot even imagine. He must have been somehow brainwashed or something," unquote. It should be noted that Breivik's stepfather was a captain in the Norwegian army, and he has the diplomat dad. Very interesting. Then there's the question of his cosmetic surgeries. He had the nose job and a couple other procedures, and these were all done in America. Like, where did he get the money for that? Who paid for the procedures? Good questions. According to Belarusian opposition figure Mikhail Reshnikov, Breivik underwent paramilitary training in a camp organized by retired KGB Colonel Valery Lunev, a former colonel of the Belarusian Special Forces, who now lives in the Netherlands but regularly visits Belarus. He claims Breivik visited Belarus 3 times and had lasting connections with the country. The stepbrother of the crown princess just so happened to be unalive during the shooting. It was reported that police were looking for a camera that Breivik apparently had used to film the attack. Could there be a connection to snuff films? I mean, it's so weird. Breivik's lawyer, Mr. Lipstad, claimed that Anders was on psychotropic drugs during the massacre, and there were firemen who were on the island that reported hearing shots after Breivik was already taken into custody. So where was that coming from? Interestingly, prior to the attack, Norway had reversed its support for the bombardment of Libya and withdrew from the NATO operation on August 1st, 2011. They were set to vote on a Palestinian state at the UN in September of 2011. Norway had also moved to freeze a $42 million payment to Greece, and Oslo had excluded 2 Care Bear firms from a $450 billion Euro oil fund for ethical reasons. So I believe the Care Bears were pretty mad at Norway. In August 2011, Mask of Zion wrote, "The manner in which the unsuspecting innocents on Utoya Island were massacred was yelling at the top of its lungs, 'There is more than one shooter, there's more than one shooter,' and indeed there was. Multiple eyewitnesses confirmed that at least 2 shooters were on the island, as bullets spilled blood from 2 different directions at the exact same time. The second shooter was described as Nordic in appearance, tall, with dark hair." The brutality of Breivik and the other gunmen was also described. Eyewitnesses confirmed Breivik and his accomplice made sure whoever was shot dead, including a young boy who was already dying on the ground as the second shooter fired into him again to solidify it. And where were the police? Where were the anti-T units or the SWAT team or anyone? Why did it take 90 minutes before any law enforcement showed up? And why was their access to helicopters blocked? In fact, why did this bloodshed even occur? Why wasn't Breivik taken into custody back in March when he was put on a Norwegian Secret Service watch list for purchasing massive amounts of fertilizer? How was a man on an intelligence watch list able to acquire such high-powered weaponry? And lastly, how did Norwegian police know Anders Behring Breivik's name before they even arrived on the island and obtained a visual identification of the suspect? The Anders Behring Breivik affair is not the first time the Care Bear apparatus known as the Mossad has meddled in Norway. On July 21st, 1973, in the Norwegian resort town of Lillehammer, a Mossad hit squad shot dead a Moroccan waiter named Ahmed Bouchiki in front of his pregnant wife. In a miserable, disgraced operation, the agents mistook Bouchiki for Hassan Salameh, a PLO intelligence chief and premier Mossad target. The Nordic nation reopened the case in 1990 and tried for a decade to get a conviction before abandoning the case in disgust in 2000. The Lillehammer affair was led by Mossad veteran Mike Harari, infamous for dealing $500 million worth of Care Bear arms across Latin America, and his role as an advisor, i.e. handler, to U.S. Care Bear intelligence asset and Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega. It is now known that Anders Behring Breivik traveled to the Care Bear Nation several times before the July 22nd operation. What isn't known is what Breivik's reasons were for traveling to the Care Bear-governed historic Palestine, but based on the evidence presented in the previous section, it is of the strongest likelihood that Breivik made the pilgrimage to the occupied Holy Land to receive additional orders from his paymasters. Care Bear Norwegian tension has been at an all-time high since the Care Bear regime's bombing of illegally besieged Gaza during Operation Cast Lead. During the bombardment, a prominent Norwegian physician named Dr. Mads Gilbert performed invaluable humanitarian work and documented the Care Bear Nation's crimes against humanity in detail. Now we're going to get into Gladio and the Order 777. Famed researcher Peter Dale Scott wrote an article in August 2011 entitled Norway's Terror as Systemic Destabilization, Breivik, the Arms for Drugs Milieu, and Global Shadow Elites, which I think does a pretty good high-level analysis of the events of 722. From the article, he writes, "The most surprising aspect of the recent, unexpected violence in Norway is that, in retrospect, it is not surprising. Our revived hopes after the end of the Cold War that we might be finally emerging into a world of diminishing bloodshed have been abundantly disabused. Events of seemingly random, irrational violence, such as that which shocked us when President Kennedy was assassinated, have become a predictable part of the world in which we live. But the backgrounds of some violent events are more mysteriously organized than, say, those of a resentful and quasi-spontaneous grudge killing. For some time, I have discussed such acts as the Kennedy assassination as what I call deep events, events obscured or misrepresented in mainstream media, whose origins are mysterious but often intelligence-related, attributed to marginal outsiders, but intersecting with large, powerful, but covert forces, having the power and intent to influence history. More recently, I have emphasized the need to analyze deep events comparatively as part of an ongoing substrate in so-called developed societies, and to raise the question of whether key deep events are interrelated. Breivik's mayhem on July 22, 2011, has forced me to clarify my definition of a deep event, to distinguish between those which are merely unsolved or mysterious in themselves and those which have proved to be part of a larger systemic mystery, grounded in the structures of either society itself or its shadow underworld, or in some combination of the two. As I wrote 3 years ago, the unthinkable, that elements inside the state would conspire with criminals to unalive innocent civilians, has become not only thinkable, but commonplace in the last century. As examples of systemic deep events, we can point to 2 spectacular bombings in Italy, the Piazza Fontana bombing in Milan and simultaneous Rome bombing of 1969. These were initially blamed on marginal left-wing anarchists, but were ultimately revealed to have been false flags, organized as part of a strategy of tension by right-wing neo-fascists inside the Italian military intelligence agency SISMI, with a possible green light, according to the chief of SISMI, from elements in the CIA. Since then, an Italian premier has confirmed that the parallel intelligence structure responsible for the bombings was part of a stay-behind network, Gladio, which we've talked about before on the show. We've gone into other Gladio-connected events, which we now know was originally organized by NATO as a potential resistance in the event of a Soviet occupation of Western Europe. Because at that time, the Soviet Union had expanded into a lot of Eastern Europe, taking over these other countries. And there was concern that they would take over all of Europe. Moreover, in the words of an Italian parliamentary commission, those massacres, those bombs, those military actions had been organized or promoted or supported by men linked to the structures of the United States. In country after country, the Gladio network soon deteriorated into activist anti-democratic cells with intelligence connections. They've been shown to have been behind other acts of violence, including the actions of the Grey Wolves in Turkey and the Brabant massacres of 1983 through 1985 in Belgium. Nor is this ancient history. In November 1990, Italian Premier Andretti revealed that Italy, along with France and the other NATO countries, had just convened at a secret NATO Gladio meeting just the month before. After the fall of the Berlin Wall. This persisting presence of Gladio networks throughout Europe, including Norway, there was a cell in Norway, raises the question, was 7/22 a systemic deep event, or at least a possible deep event? Having pondered this for a month, my conclusions, all tentative except the first, are these. Number 1, Breivik most probably did not act alone, despite the latest official reports that claim prosecutors and police have said they are fairly certain he planned and committed these acts on his own. 2, we should probably look for his associates in the demi-monde mobilized outside and against the state, rather than in the structures of the state itself. 3, that 7/22 is probably not a traditional false flag operation. The milieu of Breivik's associates is indeed probably that pointed to without incrimination in the alleged Breivik Manifesto and video. 4, the motive of 7/22 may have been to maximize publicity for the political message of one particular group in this milieu, the Euro-nationalist Knights Templar of former neo-N turned counter-jihad publicist Nick Gregor. Keep that name in mind. 5, we should look behind the counter-jihad ideology of Breivik and Gregor's Knights Templar to the arms for drugs trafficking connections of their avowed heroes and contacts, particularly of the Serbian mafioso and Red Beret veteran Milorad Ulemek. 6, of particular interest are the criminal connections between the drug trafficker Ulemek and possibly Breivik, and the Russian arms and drugs metagroup Far West LLC, a group I've discussed elsewhere for its involvement in systemic destabilization, possibly even connected to 9/11. 7, Far West involvement in systemic destabilization was probably not just self-motivated, but had protection, if not instigation, from Far West connections to what David Rothkamp in an important book has called the illicit shadow elites that are part of the world's elite superclass. 8. Thus, Norway's terror, like comparable bombings in Italy and Turkey, illustrates once again the congruence between the dark quadrant of systemic destabilization, or what I once called managed violence, in the milieu of the international drug trafficking. I think Peter Dale Scott has a pretty solid analysis of the event. He actually identified the Serbian Crusader commander that the police claimed they couldn't identify. And he wrote this like a month after the event. He continues, James Petras has wondered whether Breivik's actions on 7/22 were part of a Norwegian strategy of tension on the model of Piazza Fontana. He has raised what he calls the obvious question as to the degree to which the ideology of right-wing extremism, neo-fascism, has penetrated the police and security forces, especially the upper echelons. He thus suspects the extreme delay of police in reaching the island of Utoya, a suspicion enhanced by confirmed reports in the Norwegian news media. Breivik had called police several times during the attack. In response, the Norwegian peace researcher Ola Tønneder has observed that the Norwegian security establishment and police resources are smaller than what a foreigner might imagine. She says Norway is a small country with a relatively unified power structure where everyone knows each other, and there is less of a clear split between the security forces and political elite. Close friends of the chief of police, for example, the deputy foreign minister, were among those with children on Utoya Island. This may not close the debate, though, for Norway also had a Gladio stay-behind network, Rock'n'Roll, also known as ROC, that was partly funded and controlled by NATO, the CIA, and the British MI6. ROC was also controversial. In the 1950s, a secret controversy arose from Norway's discovery that an American in Norway's NATO headquarters had spied upon high-ranking Norwegian officials. The left-wing Norwegian intelligence chief who discovered this situation and protested it to NATO, Wilhelm Ewing, was later forced out of office by other Norwegian security officials as the indirect result of a secret allegation forwarded by CIA counterintelligence chief James Jesus Angleton. So Norway's security apparatus was not entirely homogeneous and autonomous. Whatever the facts, 7/22 must be distinguished from a classical false flag event by Gladio stay-behind networks. Traditionally, in such cases, the designated perpetrator was associated with the left. Breivik, the man, is unique, proclaiming his affiliations with both the Unabomber philosophy and right-wing counter-jihad milieu. But 7/22, the event, is more familiar and presents a number of features that are also reminiscent from past deep events. One, the legend or documented characterization of the perpetrator. Two, planted clues, or what I have elsewhere referred to as a paper trail, often including videos suitable for post-event promotion of the legend. Three, in particular, planted auto-documentation, a genre ranging in variety from the historic diary, quote-unquote, of Lee Harvey Oswald to the writings of Ted Kaczynski. 4, a tested modus operandi for mass bombing. The word legend is a term of art from the intelligence world, meaning a myth that is created around a person, usually to hide their real intentions and their real loyalties. I use it here without prejudging the truth or falsity of the myth or the relationship of the authorship of the Manifesto by Breivik. Above all, in what follows, I do not mean to imply that the myth can be dismissed as a cynical artifact. Indeed, it seems clear that the author of the Manifesto and video, whether Breivik alone or somebody else, was consciously creating a myth of a crusade against Islam, which they sincerely believed in. I see the widespread resentments of Breivik and countless others about multiculturalism as a serious phenomenon worthy of sympathetic understanding. Technology and globalization, as much in Russia and China and the West, are creating problems for the survival and health of cultures everywhere, from Thailand to Tibet to the banlieue of Paris, for which it is difficult to see short-term solutions. One response, ironically shared by Euro-nationalist crusaders like Breivik and also their jihadi Islamist opponents, is to be drawn to crusader jihadi violence. The secular anarchist Ted Kaczynski, quoted by Breivik, shows another version of this response. Oliver Roy and others have sensitively analyzed the appeal of Salafi jihad to young Muslims in Europe, with an identity crisis caused by their alienation from the various distant cultures of their ancestors, as much as their alienation in Western culture. We need also to address the identity crisis of those who see their traditional monocultures in Norway, as anywhere else, challenged by rapid mass migration and changes that are inadequately discussed, let alone managed. Breivik the man, though, must be viewed as unreliable, and every statement from him viewed with the greatest suspicion. Yet his extensive auto-documentation, by which I mean his internet manifesto, the video that he published, and the Facebook page attributed to him, deserve to be assessed carefully, regardless of who actually created them, especially in the light of later statements he is alleged to have made to Norwegian police. And here we can say that, whatever the truth about Breivik, the auto-documentation shows connections leading ultimately to this shadowy underworld of arms and drugs trafficking that may have also fostered Al-Qaeda. It is exceedingly common for high publicity deep events to be accompanied by such auto-documentation. After the diaries of Lee Harvey Oswald and Sirhan Sirhan, the alleged diary attributed to Arthur Bremer, the man who was said to have shot the 1972 presidential candidate George Wallace, stimulated Gore Vidal to wonder in an essay he wrote for the New York Review of Books whether the true author of that diary might not have been the CIA officer and Watergate plotter E. Howard Hunt. So perhaps the Wallace shooting might have been a systemic deep event. Somewhat like Breivik, Oswald left behind a legacy of auto-documentation, some of which proved to be very suited for post-assassination TV. This included, besides a diary and extensive political manuscripts, an audio-visual tape involving an ex-army psychological warfare expert and expounding his alleged political beliefs. Yet the differences are instructive. Oswald's auto-documentation of his alleged left-wing identity can be seen in retrospect as false, and probably part of an FBI-CIA effort to discredit the Fair Play for Cuba committee that Oswald had tried to penetrate. Breivik's video appears to express his true beliefs, even though I shall argue in a moment that most of the video may have been prepared by somebody else. Yet in contrast to Breivik's, the misleading Oswald audio video was aired extensively after the JFK assassination as part of the propaganda campaign to smear him as a leftist. The Breivik video, by comparison, has been downplayed, and indeed has disappeared from many, if not most, of the websites where it was originally posted. This suggests to me the Breivik video was intended to capitalize on the publicity caused by his actions, but that the group behind this effort was not part of mainstream Western society and is not currently being supported by those in charge of the mainstream media. I shall suggest shortly it was designed primarily for a different audience, the world of the resentful who find an outlet for their resentment on the internet. Both the content and authorship of Breivik's video remain very mysterious. What seems relatively clear is that it was not composed or controlled by Breivik alone, obviously. Same with the 1,500-page manifesto. The evidence of plural authorship for the video is internal. Almost all of the video appears to be a sped-up version of a text-heavy sequence of stills, possibly originally a slideshow presentation about the Knights Templar and their fellow Crusaders. It is clear both that a great deal of work has gone into the preparation and presentation of the text, and also that the text serves little or no purpose in the sped-up Breivik version, for there are sometimes up to 20 lines of text on a screen page for which not more than about 4 or 5 lines can be read even quickly in the time allotted to them. Otherwise, the video is of professional quality, definitely not a home movie. One of the stylistic features underlining it is the steady, predictable rhythm in the 3 to 4 second time lapses allotted to each still. This rhythm is broken jarringly at the very end when 3 photos of Breivik himself appear. The first 2 are presented very swiftly, completely out of sync with the rhythmic presentation of the rest of the video. I am left with the strong impression that whoever added Breivik stills at the end of the video, who may possibly even have been Breivik himself, was not the original videographer or slideshow preparer. It was someone instead with a different style, sensibility, and purpose. It would not surprise me to learn there are other discernible and even quantifiable differences between the slideshow and Breivik parts of the video with respect to such details as light. Whoever emailed out the video and manifesto just before the attacks was most likely aware of what was about to unfold, and if there is more than one author for the video, then Breivik was most probably not acting alone. For the release of the 2 documents must be considered an integral, indeed an essential part of the 7/22 event, indeed the point of it. I shall argue shortly that its aim was not just slaughter, but publicity to provoke a heightened discussion about the issues and promoters of counter-jihad. It has been widely noted that Breivik in 7/22 used the same bombing MO as Oklahoma City in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, an ammonium nitrate bomb concealed in a parked vehicle. As Andrew Gumbel wrote in an op-ed for the LA Times, quote, Breivik appears to have been more than simply inspired by American predecessors such as Timothy McVeigh. The materials he used, the way he planned and carried out his attack, and his own writings all suggest he was deeply familiar with the actions of some notorious political killers on this side of the Atlantic. Breivik possessed a Glock semi-automatic, the same weapon McVeigh was carrying when he was arrested by Highway Patrol 90 minutes after the April 95 bombing in Oklahoma. Breivik also possessed a .223 caliber Ruger assault rifle just like McVeigh. The debate still continues whether Breivik himself could have developed the skills to make a successful ammonium nitrate bomb, but there are strong indications that the 1993 WTC bombers and one of the 2 known Oklahoma City bombers, Tim McVeigh and Terry Nichols, received training from abroad, possibly from Al-Qaeda. Dana Rohrabacher explored the apparent connections in the Philippines between Terry Nichols and Ramzi Youssef, the Al-Qaeda-linked mastermind of the 93 WTC bombing. Youssef is a close associate and relative of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, said to be the mastermind of 9/11, and I'm going to call X to doubt on that. According to researcher J.M. Berger and others, in November 1994, Terry Nichols and Ramzi Youssef both walked the grounds of the same college campus, Southwestern University, in the Philippine city of Cebu, where an Islamist cell was active. Later, each man booked a flight on the same airline. It's worth recalling that the 93 bombing of the World Trade Center, the attackers were trained by a member of Al-Qaeda, Ali Mohammed, who was most certainly an agent working for U.S. intelligence. The same trainer, quote-unquote, led the 1998 attack on the U.S. Embassy and may have trained the alleged 9/11 hijackers as well. This continuity suggests all of these incidents of violence may have been part of an ongoing strategy of tension to destabilize society as a means to justify the ever-mounting budgets for America's security forces. In American War Machine, I devoted an entire chapter to the question of whether we should see 9/11 as part of an ongoing tradition of engineered deep events. The fact that Breivik imitated McVeigh does not prove they were part of the same organization. It's possible Breivik consciously imitated McVeigh as a way of heightening and shading the aura of mystery he cultivated around his actions, or if you will, as a kind of homage to McVeigh, along with Ted Kaczynski and others I shall name shortly. But I shall argue that Breivik may indeed have been intimate with the arms for drugs milieu that can also be perceived in the background of OKC and Al-Qaeda. Breivik's planted clues about his finances also point mysteriously to international connections beyond what was needed for 722 alone. In this case, the mystery of his finances is reinforced by evidence we learn independently from the Norwegian police. Namely that in 2007, a year in which he reported little taxable income, the equivalent of $115,000 was mysteriously deposited into his bank account. This important clue, not coming from Breivik himself, refers to a time when government records suggest his early attempts at business were a failure. Breivik himself has reportedly heightened the mystery behind the alleged loaner, quote-unquote. He is said to have explained to police that he had 10 times as much money, about $1.1 million, to finance his DT attack. His lawyer, Geir Lipstad, has added that his planning also involved extensive travel. He writes, Breivik has traveled in many countries in Europe via car, ferry, and plane. These states correspond to some of those mentioned in Breivik's so-called Manifesto, which he repeatedly mentioned during the interrogations. According to Lipstad, Breivik's traveling has been directly related to the planning of the attacks, which was most intense in recent years. He has met with an unknown number of people who have helped him obtain materials, and he also explained most of the equipment is from abroad. In earlier questioning, Breivik explained he had 6 million kroner to finance the event. An even more suggestive lead to this hidden financial dimension is a statement attached to the Breivik Manifesto in which Breivik, quote-unquote, claimed to describe his irregular commercial and banking activity. It says, from 2005 to 2007, he was the managing director of e-commerce group AS, part investment company, part sales and outsourcing company. He writes that he converted ABB ENK to a corporation with a total of 7 employees, 3 in Norway, 1 in Russia, 1 in Indonesia, 1 in Romania, and 1 in the US. Distribution of outsourcing services to foreign companies, sold software and programming solutions, worked part-time with day trading, stocks, options, currency, commodities. This was a front with the purpose of financing resistance and liberation-related military operations. The company was successful, although most of the funds were channeled through a Caribbean subsidiary with base in Antigua, a location where European countries don't have access. Brentwood Solutions Limited, with bank accounts in other Caribbean nations in Eastern Europe. E-commerce Group was terminated in 2007, while most of the funds were channeled in an unorthodox manner to Norway, available to the coming intellectual and subsequent operations phase. Antigua, a small island in the Caribbean, was noted for its corrupt banks that have ties to intelligence. It was used, for example, by BCCI and Care Bear operatives in the 1980s for illicit arms sales to the Median cartel. Some have seen a possible implication of the Care Bear Nation in this allusion to Antigua by Breivik, an avowed pro-Care Bearist in his manifesto. The same people have pointed to an article by Barry Rubin in the July 31st Jerusalem Post, claiming that the Utoya youth camp Breivik attacked was engaging in what was, quote, essentially a pro-T program as they were rehearsing ways to break the Care Bear blockade of Gaza. Finally, some have pointed to growing links between the right-wing parties of the Care Bear Nation and formerly anti-Semitic right-wing parties extolled in the Breivik Manifesto. In this article, I am arguing neither for or against the involvement of the Care Bears along with others in the events of 7/22. I will argue we should look for an ultimate source, not in the covert structures of any single state, but in a paranational dark force with the capacity to collude with these states and even manipulate them. In short, both the Breivik auto-documentation and independent reports from police about his bank account suggest that there is an unexplored higher dimension to his crimes. The Breivik Manifesto and video enhance this suggestion, associating Breivik with an alleged larger movement of pro-Knights Templar crusading in defense of Judeo-Christian Europe. The manifesto describes a Knights Templar meeting Breivik is said to have attended in London, one consisting of maybe about 5 people, including a Russian and a Serbian, by proxy location, Monrovia, Liberia, apparently represented at the meeting by Breivik himself, who was now eluding punishment for his killings of Muslims in Bosnia. He wrote, "I joined the session after visiting one of the initial facilitators, a Serbian crusader commander and war hero in Monrovia, Liberia." There are reasons to suspect this Serbian commander was Milorad Ulemek, also known as Milorad Lukovic, a former commander of the Serbian paramilitary unit known as Arkan's Tigers, later known as the Red Berets, that initiated ethnic cleansing in Bosnia. The Breivik Manifesto extols the Tigers and their commanders, including the late Ratnovic, Arkan, and Ulemek, as role models. The video attributed to Breivik shows some remarkable similarities to another pro-Ulemek video, this one released by the leader of a self-professed Knights Templar group called the Order 777. The leader, now supposedly reformed, is a former anti-Muslim DT and bomber from East Germany by the name of Nick Gregor. He went by Commander Mad Nick or Mad Nick 77. Gregor is a man of many talents and interest, including as an artist and author, and above all, he is an obsessive poster of videos on the internet. These Order 777 videos, like Breivik's, urge Judeo-Christian Europe to unite against the menace of Islam. He says in one of the videos, "It's not about race, it's about religion," and the related menace of globalist multiculturalism as enforced by the UN and US. One particular video posted by Gregor, the Order 777 Immortals, is so similar to Breivik's in its stylistic details, it suggests a common origin may exist for both. Readers can view the videos themselves and make their own judgments. Both videos are divided into sections, and in each, the final, quote, optimistic counter-jihad section is prefaced by a picture of a Knights Templar with his distinctive heraldry of a red Maltese cross on a white field. The following description of the Gregor video in the London Daily Telegraph is accurate. They write, "The group, calling itself Order 777, claims to bring together Christian resistance movements and features a depiction of a Knights Templar, one with a red Maltese cross with the slogan, 'The Order 777 strikes back,' alongside footage of a variety of armed gangs with the words 'Factions United.' The groups include the UFF and Northern Ireland, Serbian nationalists, Liberian and Congolese fighters, and members of the neo-fascist AWB in South Africa. In one clip, Gregor is handling a Kalashnikov, and in another he says, 'The war of the future will be a war of the religions.' A number of similarities between the compendium, Breivik's Manifesto, and the Order 777 videos have begun to emerge. Breivik said he'd attended the founding meeting of the Knights Templar Europe in London after visiting one of the initial facilitators, a Serbian crusader commander and war hero in Liberia. Both the compendium and the Order 777 videos feature a man called Milorad Ulemek, a former commander of the Red Berets, a unit of the Serbian security services called the JSO, who was arrested in 2004 and convicted of the assassinations of the Serbian Prime Minister and former Serbian president, and of organizing the attempted murder of a Serbian opposition leader. The videos also feature Charles Taylor, the former Liberian dictator now facing war crimes trials, and a girl called Black Diamond who fought on the rebel army side against Taylor in 2003. To these similarities should be added others: their division into sections, their opening with a Latin quote, their staccato sequence of stills surrounded by heavy black borders with accompanying lettering, their background of loud, ominous choral music, the scenes from Africa, their focus on heroic or would-be heroic Christian crusaders past and present, their optimistic counter-jihad final sections preceded by a picture of a Knights Templar with a red Maltese cross. There are also photos on the internet of Nick Gregor himself sporting a Knights Templar t-shirt with the same Maltese cross that Breivik posted on the first page of his manifesto. Taylor, like all but 2 of the 9 men celebrated in Gregor's video, was implicated in the arms for drugs trafficking. A fact not mentioned in Gregor's video is that of the 9 men celebrated at its outset, all but 2, Eugene Terreblanche of South Africa and Laurent Nkuda of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, were united not by ideology, but by their involvement in arms for drugs trafficking. These included 6 who've been directly identified as drug traffickers: Charles Taylor, self-installed president of Liberia; Samir Gega, militia leader in Lebanon; Johnny Adair, former Protestant militia leader in Northern Ireland; Irish militia hitman Gary Smith and allegedly Billy Wright; and most significantly, Breivik and Gregor's hero, Milorad Ulemek. Ulemek was not just a militia leader, but he was a Serbian mafioso and a member of the so-called Zemun clan, a combination of now defunct secret police units and powerful gangsters from the Belgrade suburb of Zemun, who ran drug smuggling operations all over the Balkans and were involved in dozens of killings and abductions. But for Breivik's heroes, Ratnevik, Arkan, and Ulemek, the drugs may have been a more serious and ongoing part of their career as a means to the arms and ethnic cleansing in Bosnia. Russian sources have linked Ulemek with Vladimir Filin, the Russian leader of Far West LLC, a group of former Soviet military intelligence officers accused of arms and drug trafficking. Far West is not to be thought of as like a local drug mafia like the Zemun gang, but as a multinational linchpin between organized crime, including drug trafficking, and the global intelligence and corporate establishment. From its origins as a Soviet military intelligence GRU group in Afghanistan, with responsibility for narcotics matters, it has expanded globally and now enjoys connections to the intelligence networks of the Care Bear Nation, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Great Britain, and the US. Far West consisted of a multinational connection of structures and networks in particular locations. Those using and protecting it didn't constitute a structure, but more a paranational milieu without any single location or organization. This brings us back to Ulemek and Filin, whose connection must have been a matter of business rather than ideology. Ulemek had been involved in killing Muslims, whereas members of Far West, who included Muslims, were allegedly involved in backing Muslim jihads inside Russia. But Ulemek and Filin, along with Gregor and indeed Breivik, had a common interest in one goal: the destabilization of existing society. Obviously, for their activities, whether paramilitary violence, arms trafficking, or drugs, destabilization is beneficial. Of course, destabilization is not profitable to drug traffickers alone. It also generates business for the powerful bureaucracies and private military corporations whose practice it is to intervene in destabilized countries. Finally, it's a source of income to those illicit elites who are themselves safely above drug trafficking, but have become rich through banking proceeds associated with it. The Breivik Manifesto and video constitute a veritable cherry orchard of planted clues from which it is possible to cherry-pick a number of alternative explanatory scenarios. In my own case, I've been guided by the need to test a double hypothesis I put forward in my book, American War Machine. There exists an ongoing milieu that is repeatedly a source for the systemic destabilization in many of the world's major deep events, and there is a congruence between this dark quadrant of systemic destabilization, or what I called managed violence, in the milieu of international drug trafficking. The events of 7/22 do not by themselves resolve the mystery of this dark force, but they do help to underline its ongoing significance. And so there is also a connection to the Christchurch shooter Brenton Tarrant to the Order 777 and Anders Breivik. Christchurch shooter Brenton Tarrant claimed in his manifesto that he received his real inspiration from Anders Breivik, with whom he had a brief contact and from whom he received his blessing for the attack. Now, we don't know if he actually did contact him or have a connection to Breivik, or how or when that happened, but it's interesting that he said it did. Also interestingly, Breivik and Tarrant both claimed contact with Knights Templars Europe, a counter-jihad group formed in 2002. Both times, the media said that the group doesn't exist, ignoring the AOTK formed by ex-EDL member Paul Ray, who is likely cited in Breivik's manifesto as Braveheart. Brank Militic writes about Tarrant, why did a self-confessed dummy at school have an AR-15 covered in Serbian Cyrillic, along with Georgian and Armenian scripts, while driving and playing the anti-Muslim Serb nationalist song known as Remove Kebab just before committing his acts? Maybe one answer lies in the fact that it has been confirmed the Serbian war criminal and Czechnik luminary known as Captain Dragon, who was extradited to Croatia in 2016 for war crimes and crimes against humanity, was apprehended in 2010 in Grafton, only minutes from Tarrant's home, and he happened to be a member of Tarrant's gym. So they probably knew each other. Tarrant also visited Serbia, along with that cradle of mythomania. Serbia occupied Bosnia in 2016, according to various overseas sources, who've also noted his Facebook page, which is now deleted, was full of Chetnik profiles from Australia. According to the Associated Press, authorities in Bulgaria, Turkey, and Croatia have confirmed Brenton Tarrant had also been to their countries in 2016 through 2018. Hungarian Counter-T authorities suggested Tarrant had visited there, along with 2 stays in Turkey in 2016 on March 17th through 20th and from September 13th to October 25th. So isn't that interesting? You know, he talked about there being these other cells, other networks, other people he was connected with, and we were told that that wasn't the case, and yet it seems like it was. I think it's obvious Breivik was working with a larger international network with ties to Western intelligence. It seems like we have a mix here of Gladio, PTK, ZioMasonic organizations, criminal elements of the underworld, and shades of MKUltra. Whatever the truth may be, we can be certain that the official narrative is false in the way the mainstream media has portrayed Anders Behring Breivik as a lone wolf DT is equally false and was done to obscure the real people pulling the strings in the background. This was very long, and if you made it this far, I'm proud of you. I'm interested to know what you guys think, though, and I hope you all have a good day.